بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد
وآل الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين جل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف اللهم أخرجني من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمني بنور الفهم اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا خزائن علومك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Alhamdulillah, we have tawfiq to carry on with our study of moral philosophy. As you remember, we said one of the important issues is moral concepts. We have to understand how to define moral concept and what's the source or origin for these concepts. Before, yes?
Before you start, sorry, there's confusion between the secondary intelligence, philosophical and logical.
Yes.
Is the philosophical one present outside and the thing is inside, and logical one is both inside?
Yes. So, المعقولات الثانية المنطقية are those concepts that only exist in mind and are only also applicable to mental concepts. So they exist in mind and they can only be used as a kind of description for something in mind. But al-ma'qulat al-thaniya al-falsafiyya, they exist in mind, but they are applied to external things. So for example, when we have fire and wood is burnt by fire, there is no such a thing as causality separately existing outside. Our mind reflects and abstracts, intizar, abstracts the concept of causality. But causality is a description that we can use for something outside. This fire is the cause, really it's the cause. There is a causal relation between fire and burning. But in Ma'qul al-Thaniya Mantiqi, everything is in mind. We said the concept of kulli, for example, the concept of no. These are only in the mind. So, after talking about three types of concepts, al-ma'qulat al-ula, the primary intelligibles which are mafahim ma'hubi, المعقولات الثانية المنطقية and المعقولات الثانية الفلسفية, logical secondary intelligibles or philosophical secondary intelligibles. Now we started to understand what is the situation with moral concepts. And we said, as you remember, moral concepts are sometimes used as the subject or what is equivalent to subject if it is a command, for example. For example, we say, telling truth is good, so telling truth is the subject. Or tell the truth. Here we don't say subject and predicate, but it's like that. So, what occurs in moral sentences, in moral propositions, as the subject, like telling truth, justice, murder, theft, charity, Salay al-Rahim, Birrul Walidain, all these concepts, these are all al-ma'qul al-thani al-falsafi. These are secondary philosophical intelligibles. Why? You may say, no, these can be also sometimes just mahuvi, like an action. For example, theft is an action, is a physical action. Or, for example, killing It's a physical action. Why you are saying this is secondary? The answer is you have to distinguish. This is a very important point. You have to distinguish between two things. The physics of the action and what is the moral subject. The physics of the action has no moral significance. For example, taking gun and shooting, this by itself is not moral action in the sense that it has no moral significance. Because imagine a robot takes the gun and shoots. A child, a mad person who have no moral responsibility. Or for example, giving water to someone who is thirsty. Just the physics. Maybe it's done by someone who doesn't have any understanding. Maybe it is done by a machine. Maybe it's done by a person who wants to show off. So, the physics of action is not what is morally relevant or significant. What is important is the quality which is only understood after a secondary reflection of aql. And that is when a moral agent does something with understanding. A moral agent with understanding, with intention, does something, then we can say this was good or this was bad, this was right or this was wrong. You understand the difference? So what you see is the physics of the action, but what an ethicist has concern about is not the physics of the action only. It's much more than that. You understand the difference between moral action and just action? Moral action is different from just action, because action can be done by a robot, can be done by a child, by a mad person, can be done with good intention or bad intention. All the time the physics is the same. Two people fighting, one is for the sake of God, one is for the sake of shaitan. The physics of the action is the same. But the moral aspect is different. So now you realize why we emphasize that subject in moral proposition is always معقول ثانية فلسفي. We explained this in details in philosophy and also last session. Okay? So, what about predicate? We said there are 7 major concepts that can be used in moral proposition as predicate. What are those 7? Good and bad, right and wrong, ought and ought not, and obligation. Okay? Good and bad, right and wrong are evaluative. Ought and ought not and obligation are obligatory. Okay? In Farsi we say moral concepts, these 7 are divided to arzashi and elzami. You can say evaluative or obligatory or obligational. Okay? So, I want to give you a challenge. If you can find any moral statement which has a concept as predicate other than these 7. If you can find, then we give you a prize. Yes, you have it?
No, I mean.
And if you say mistake, we take the prize from him. Okay.
Probably there isn't. You say we'll give a prize, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, they say it's only 7, but we shouldn't accept it without trying.
Ah.
So I want you to try, use your own, intelligence. Maybe you can find a new idea. But moral philosophers say normally it's only these 7. And everything else goes back to these 7 as predicates. Okay, we are not talking about subject. Subject are hundreds. Okay. Now, we want to see whether these concepts can be defined or not. Which concepts? These 7. Not the subjects, because subjects can be defined. What is murder? What is theft? What is telling the truth? What is abortion? We can define them. Sometimes it's difficult, of course, like what is justice? But still we can try. Since the time of Socrates, even before, there have been lots of discussion about what is justice. Yes? But we can define, we can have some discussion about it. And there is not that much difference between moral philosophers about the subject in the way that different schools of philosophy have different ideas about the definition of the subject. In other words, maybe some moral philosophers are against abortion, some are in favor of abortion, but they don't have difference in what is abortion, normally. Yeah? Some people might be against, for example, mercy killing. Some might be in favor. But the definition is there. What is very much discussed and has actually partitioned moral philosophers is whether we can define predicates, those 7. Good, bad, right, wrong, ought not, obligation. But before I go into this, I would like to remind you that when we are talking about good and bad or right and wrong, we mean good and bad in moral sense, not good and bad in, for example, physical sense or pragmatic sense. You remember when we were talking in Baba Hadi Ash about al-husn wal-qubh, we said there are 3 meanings for husn and qubh. Sometimes husn means something is good, like for example, we say this knife is hasan, is good. What does it mean? It means it can cut. It can cut the meat, for example, or the fruit, whatever. So, to be good or bad in this sense is not something that moral ethicists have disagreement, because this is actually not related to morality. Yeah? Every person can test this, whether it's cutting or not. Or sometimes we said good and bad in the sense of pleasant or unpleasant. This is also ma yula'imu tab' or yunafiru tab'. This is also not related to moral discussion, to husn and qubh. Yeah, for example, we say this fragrance is good. Or if there is rubbish, say it smells bad. Goodness and badness also in this sense, ma yula'imu tab' or yunafiru tab' is also not controversial. There was a third meaning for husn qubh, which is related to morality. Who remembers? al-hasan in the sense of ma yastahiq al-madh, wal-qabih ma yastahiq al-dhamb. Something which is praiseworthy or blameworthy in this sense. This is the moral sense. Okay, that was where Mu'tazilites, Ash'arites had this agreement whether al-husn wal-qubh are zati or arazi, and therefore based on that it's aqli or shar'i. This is just something as a reminder for those who studied Baba Hadi Ash and as a preparation for those who are going to study inshallah in future. In any case, what is important is good and bad can be used in different ways. What we mean here is moral goodness, moral badness. Okay? The same is with right and wrong. For example, you want to switch on the TV. Then you ask, is this right or wrong? This is not moral right or wrong. This is a physical thing. If you switch it on in this way, it functions. If you switch it on in another way, it doesn't function, or it may break down. This good, right and wrong is not moral. So good and bad, right and wrong, in the sense of moral, or even ought and ought not. For example, you say, when you want to drive, you ought to turn, for example, right, and then you turn left. This again is not moral. It's not moral sense. Okay? So whenever good and bad, right and wrong, and the rest are used in moral sense, are they definable? Can we define them or not? And if we can define them, how? So this is a big issue in moral philosophy. Okay? There are three major theories. What about? Are you following me? These are three major theories about what? Whether we can define these moral concepts or not. Some theories are called deficienist theories. Deficienist. These are theories that have one common idea among them. They have differences, but all share this point that moral concepts can be defined. Defined how? Defined by using non-moral concept. It's a very, very important point. Because if you use a moral concept to define another moral concept, it means that then you cannot define moral concepts. What definitions require is to be able to reduce moral concept into something which is non-moral, something that we can understand outside morality, and therefore we can base our morality on something objective, or something at least outside morality. So that two moral thinkers, if they have disagreement, they can go outside morality and find the answer. So, according to deficientists, what is important is that moral concept should be understood by reference to non-moral concepts. These people themselves are divided. Some are naturalists, some are metaphysicists. I am sure you can guess what does naturalist here mean. You can guess. If you are a definitionist who is naturalist, it means you use natural concepts to define moral concepts. And if you are metaphysicist and definitionist, means you use metaphysical, like theological, philosophical concepts to define morality. Naturalists by themselves are divided. Some are psychologists. They use psychological concepts to define moral concepts. For example, what is good? Good is something that gives you peace of mind, tranquility, for example. So you are using a psychological concept to define morality. Okay? Some people use social concepts. Some people use biological concepts. Anyway, they use something which can be understood by natural sciences, by empirical sciences. But metaphysicists, as I said, they use theology and philosophy. For example, they say good is what is commanded by God, as Ash'arites used to say, or divine commentary in the West. The second group are the people who say we cannot define moral concepts, but we can understand them by intuition. They are called intuitionists or non-naturalist, deficienist. You can define, but not by using naturalist or metaphysical concepts. Intuition, what does it mean? Intuition, or what we call in Farsi and Arabic shuhud, means immediate knowledge of something that does not or is not possible. Either does not need argument or it's impossible to argue for. Immediately. For example, those who are intuitionists, they say, you understand moral goodness by intuition. You cannot define, you cannot explain how, you just understand. Even intuitionists can be found in, mathematics. If you study philosophy of mathematics, there are some people who are intuitionists. If you ask them, where does mathematical fact come from? They say, at the end, they go back to some basic facts that can be understood by intuition. Okay? There are many people like G.E. Moore, George Edward Moore, who was intuitionist. They say these concepts can be understood by intuition. Of course, they divide moral concepts into two, basic and derivative. Basic can be understood by intuition, but derivative can be understood by reference to the basic ones. Okay?
Which is it?
Derivative or non-basic. I hope it is clear that still we are talking about moral concepts and not about moral judgments. That's another issue. This is not about whether you can understand goodness or badness of abortion by intuition. That's another discussion. Now we are talking about how you understand moral concepts. This is not judgment. The concept of good, for example. What is morally good? Is it clear? The third view is normally known as non-cognitive theories. Because the first group and the second group had something in common. And that was the idea that moral concepts can be somehow determined or decided whether they are true or false. They inform about something, and that information can be good or bad. But those who are non-cognitivists, they say there is no factual value here. They are not talking about anything real or factual. Like emotivists, I told you last week. They say, when you say telling truth is good, just means, wow, this is, like you see something nice and you express your joy. Or sometimes, you see something bad and yet you just show your sorrow or dissatisfaction. They say it's just a kind of expression of emotions and feelings. It has no factual value. You cannot say it's true or false. Yeah? Like two people, when one person likes a color, another person doesn't like color. You cannot say the one who likes this color is right, the other one is wrong. Both of them are right. Because he likes blue, another one likes brown, for example. It's a matter of feelings and emotions and taste. So, as you see, there is a difference between moral philosophers about moral concepts, especially those 7 which can be used as predicate. The subject is not that much controversial. Inshallah, we will talk about our opinion, but we need also to discuss another thing, and that is about the source or origin of this concept. Where do these concepts come from? So before we say what is our position, you should be familiar with different possible positions and grounds here. Some people say moral concepts relate or correspond to facts, external facts, which can be understood by intellect or intuition. Intellect through reasoning, intuition is direct and immediate. Okay? This is the meaning of intuition. Intuition means you don't need to argue, you don't need to bring any proof. You understand it intuitively. So, if someone says telling truth is good, keeping promise is necessary, obligatory, this means that there is something in the real world, in the external world, that is the background of this sentence, or it's the basis of this sentence. You cannot see it by eyes, you cannot hear it by ears, but by aql or intuition, you can find it. It is not something subjective. If it was subjective, it could be different from person to person. Yeah? It is objective. It has basis in the reality, in the objective world. Okay? Are you happy? You enjoy it? Yes. I don't see that much excitement in your faces. Okay. Pardon? Okay. So, according to these people, moral concepts correspond to realities, facts that can be understood by intellect or intuition. They are addressing something about the real world. It's objective and not subjective. There is another view which says moral concepts are not objective. They are results of our insha or i'tibar, means we initiate them, we make them. For example, when you say go, come, how beautiful this is, siqatul am, siqatul nahy, siqatul ta'ajjub, istifham, how are you? These are not about facts. These are not statements. These are insha. Amr, nahy, istifham, ta'ajjub. These are all insha. Are you informing about something, then it can be true or false? No. You are not informing about anything, it cannot be true or false. Okay? Even for example, when we have transaction, for example, I say bi'tu, you say ishtaraytu. We are initiating purchase. No one can say this is right or wrong, or true or false. Yes, you can say, for example, if I sell someone that doesn't belong to me, or if I sell something very expensive, you can tell me this is not appropriate or this is not morally right, but this is another issue. This is not true or false. Because there is no true or false. Like someone who says, give me money, and he is a rich person, is a beggar, says, give me money. You cannot say this is false because he is rich. Because this does not admit truth or falsehood. It's insha. By saying, you create it. Okay? You see how much usul, logic, philosophy, moral philosophy, all are connected. And this is why you have to study all these subjects, and inshallah after you study all of them, then you will get the whole picture. Okay? So in the past we said there are films that you can only understand them at the beginning. Now we say there are films that they come in a packet. You have to watch all of them and then you understand at the end. Okay? So 3-4 films, you watch them, at the end you see what's the whole picture. Okay. The third opinion is to say that the origin is not facts, or it's not our own initiation and our own supposition. It is fitra. Some Muslim philosophers, but more than them, maybe some Western philosophers have said this, that the moral concepts are rooted in human fitra, human nature. You remember the difference between fitra and tabi'ah. We said human nature has two sides. One is common between human beings and animals. That is tabi'ah. That is our physical nature. What is exclusive to human beings? That is the fitrah. The very special way God created us. Okay, that is fitrah. In Islamic belief system, in theological instruction, we talked about fitrah. So, some moral philosophers say that moral concepts are rooted in the very way that we have been created by God, in our fitrah. Means
Term of the use
innate.
innate.
Innate knowledge. For example, people like Plato, they believe that we are born with knowledge. You know, according to Plato, for us, everything is a matter of remembering things. You don't understand anything new because we were connected to the world of ideas. Yeah, muthul, ideas. But when we came to this dunya, we forgot. And now we have to remember. Descartes, René Descartes had the idea of, again, innate knowledge. John Locke had this idea. So basically, some people say, when it comes to moral concepts, this is the way human nature works. We have been given this understanding by our fitrah. We don't gain it, we don't take it from outside, we don't learn it. We are born with this. The maximum is either you have to remember it or you have to cultivate. Something which is fitri may need to be cultivated, may need to be activated, but it is there. Yeah?
I think the Quran says when I created you, you didn't know anything.
Yes.
And it's-
هو الذي أخرجكم من بطون أمهاتكم لا تعلمون شيئا. Allah says, God is the one who created you, brought you from the wombs of your mothers while you didn't know anything. So, according to some people, this means that we didn't have fitri knowledge, but according to those who have fitri knowledge, they argue, means, they say, لا تعلمون means لا تتذكرون. Means you didn't remember anything. Yes.
So according to this ayah, the idea of Plato is put to the side, or again he says that.
Depending how you interpret the ayah. Yes.
We said human nature is tabi'ah and fitra. And I think we've also discussed before that what's exclusive to something is also the most important.
Pardon?
What's exclusive to something is also the most important
Yes.
distinguishing factor.
Yes, yes.
Maybe there's many.
So our
that
distinctively human side is the most important side of us. We have something common with animals. We have something common with animals and plants. We have something common with animals and plants and non-living beings. But we have something exclusive. That is the main part. Okay?
How about the concept
Like,
of
for example,
architecture?
Jose and a university. There is something common, which is important, but there is something exclusive to Jose. That's most important. Yeah, you have to invest on what is exclusive. Otherwise, there was no need to come to the Jose. So you can use this in many areas of life.
Also, I think it said that God says in Adam itself, He taught us everything, then we forgot it. How did
God doesn't say He taught us everything.
All about the
أشهدهم على أنفسهم. God asked us to bear witness ourselves, to have a kind of understanding of yourself. Doesn't say he taught us everything. The only case we have that God taught someone everything is Adam. علم آدم الأسماء كلها. So these people believe in innate understanding of moral concepts. According to Ayatollah Misbah, this is problematic. First, how is it that we have such innate understanding but we are not aware of it? Because something which is fitri, like innate knowledge of God, should naturally be available. You find it in all people, all ages, all generations. But this is something that you don't find it, very popular. But there is another problem. If something is innate, it means that we are born in the way that we understand them in this way. We are born in the way that we understand these things in this way. Someone may ask, okay, then you could be born in another way. For example, you are born in the way that you understand keeping promise is good. If you are not able to argue for it and show how this is related to facts, then the person said, okay, maybe there are other creatures of God that who are born in the way that they have different moral understanding. You cannot just say, because I am born with this understanding, then this is right. Of course, I personally disagree with this point. I think if we can show that this is what humanity understands, then it must be right. Because if God has created us in the way that we understand this way, and this is an implication of our creation, not this is something that we have done by mistake, I think this has to be accepted. And actually, I think this helps a lot in our theory of knowledge, in epistemology, how we can trust our intellect. I don't want to go into that discussion. So, according to Ayatollah Misbah, it's not enough to say that these are rooted in our fitrah. Also, it is not right to say these are just insha. So, we should follow the opinion of the first group that say these are factual. So what inshallah, bi'idhnillah, we will do, we will show you first how moral concepts are taken from facts. And then we will inshallah show you how we can base our moral theory on facts. So when we say telling truth is good, it's not just a claim or something you understand by fitrah or intuition. We can show a step by step why we came to this conclusion. Okay? There is something about human nature, something about these actions, and something about our perfection. I have discussed this in the last chapter of my book, Ethical Relativism. Ethical Relativism. Please read this. It should be available in the library here. The last chapter. It's foundation and analysis of the foundation of morality. It's about 40-50 pages. Please read that. It helps for our discussion. Maybe I make it one text for your exam also.
Is it start on the internet yet.
It's not on internet.
They get it from the library.
Yes, but because it's actually this was the very first book published by college in 2001 or 2002. So there I have tried to show the triangle: human nature, action, and the result that the action has on our nature. Inshallah, we will talk about these things. So maybe a little break and then inshallah we continue. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin.